Joao, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Gaspar. Morning, everyone. You're still kind of recovering from that exercise, I can see. I also see by the audience that we sustained heavy losses last night, but no worries. I think that people will start coming back throughout the day. So as Gaspar was saying, my name is Joao. I'm originally from Portugal. I've lived in Estonia for the past 15 years. And today I want to talk to you this morning a little bit about what I've been doing in the last year or so with this startup, eIDs, and how it connects with testing. I'll also talk a little bit at the end from my experience at different hackathons that I've done with Garage 48, and what can we learn from hackathon teams in the context of team dynamics. So I hope it's interesting for you and that you don't fall back to sleep. So big fat disclaimer, I'm not a tech guy, I'm not a tester. Software testing and QA is not something that I'm very familiar with. So this is going to come from a different perspective, but I hope that it is relevant for you, again, in the context of what I do. So what's my background? For the past few years, I've had the privilege of working with some big names and some big companies, mostly as a consultant in the digital marketing field, advising and trying to get some of these companies to innovate and adopt some of the latest technologies. So banks, telcos, energy companies, consumer goods companies, and also a couple of startups here in Estonia and abroad, and then some government initiatives to try to bring innovation to different sectors, so public and private. But for the past year, I've been doing eIDs. So eIDs is a company here in Estonia, and if you know someone who's good at doing logos, let me know, because we obviously need a better logo. But what do we do? So eIDs is an aggregation platform for different qualified signature providers. Does that connect with you guys? I think it's a little bit different. So let me just try to put this in the context that you understand. We're a little bit like Twilio or Stripe, but for electronic signatures. So think about it from the context of when you go to an e-commerce shop and you're doing your online shopping, at the end of the process, when you need to pay, you usually get to pick the method that you want to pay with, right? So you usually get to pick whether you want to pay with your credit card or you want to pay with your, your bank, PayPal, Apple Pay. So you have a bunch of methods that you can choose to pick. So think of us the same way, but when it comes to signing documents. So at the moment of signing a document, you will then get a chance to choose which method you want to sign with. Now, of course, as Gaspar was saying, for the Estonians in the house, signing documents electronically, signing documents with your ID card is nothing new. You've been doing it for ages. But as you will soon find out, that's not the case throughout the world. So can I just see, show of hands here, who has ever signed the document electronically? All right, this is my crowd. I like you guys already. Good. And, most of you probably think that you're doing, if you're in Estonia, you're for sure doing the highest possible quality signature because you're most likely using something like Smart ID, Mobile ID, or your Estonian ID card. But throughout the entire world, that's not the case. A lot of people are still doing basic scribbles on a PDF. And basic scribbles on a PDF are what the EU legislation on this, eIDs, calls a simple electronic signature. So simple electronic signature is anything that constitutes a confirmation that you're agreeing to something. It could be your name on an email. It could be something that you put on a chat on WhatsApp. That can constitute an electronic signature. But that is not strong enough to be valid in many cases in a court of law. So eIDs, this European regulation, has set 3 levels of signatures and 3 different distinct use cases for them. So you have the simple ones, and if you've used DocuSign, for example, then whenever you do DocuSign, you're most likely doing a simple signature. When you put your name or something on a PDF, you're doing a simple signature. When you're going a little bit further than that and you're using advanced electronic signatures, so an advanced electronic signature is something where there is already a an attempt to identify the person. So there is already a connection between your, somehow who you are and the signature you're placing. It doesn't necessarily need to be with your ID card. It can be, for example, with 2FA. It can be with, with an email that is sent to you and it's kind of binded to you. In many countries, your phone number is connected to your own identity because you need a passport to get a phone number. So there's an attempt at identifying the person and you know who is signing the document. This is good for a large number of cases because it already ties the signature to the identity of the signer. Then you have the highest possible level of signature, of quality of signature, which is called a qualified electronic signature. In the industry, we call this QES, Qualified Electronic Signature. And those are the ones that are uniquely connected with your identity. There is absolutely no doubt who is the person signing this document, and it is coming from a personal certificate that is tied to you, that you own, in the form of a physical device like your ID card. So in Estonia, most ID cards, all ID cards have a chip that has a certificate that you can use for signing. In most European countries, there's also a chip. There's also some certificates. It's just that nobody is using them. If you're using your mobile ID, your SIM card also has the certificates there. If you're using Smart ID and you're using something like remote certificates, but it constitutes also as a qualified electronic signature. And why is this important? This is important because according to this EU regulation, QES is the only one that has the same legal standing as a wet signature, as if you're actually signing on a piece of paper. And for a lot of documents throughout Europe, you need to have a qualified electronic signature. Think of things like employment contracts, bank loan agreements, anything to do with the government sector. A lot of use cases need the qualified signature. And this is where we operate. This is the kind of thing that we're doing. So what's the problem that eIDs is solving? Our customers are mainly document signing portals. So if you think of DocuSign and all the competitors out there, we are helping them to adopt this technology so that you, I mean Estonians in the house, would be able to sign documents using your smart IDs, mobile IDs in these portals, okay? So the problem is there because in 2020, when the pandemic hit, hundreds of millions of businesses throughout the entire world saw themselves with lots of people working from home, contracts that needed to be signed, legal agreements that needed to keep running, the operations needed to keep going. So they were turning to whatever alternative they could find. And in many cases, that meant DocuSign and portals like DocuSign. These portals saw a massive influx of traffic, and their stock price rose quite dramatically. But in 2022, what we're seeing now is the market is maturing and people are starting to understand that there is a difference between just a scribble on a PDF and an actual legally binding signature. And this is where people are now talking to the portals and asking, can I sign these documents with my mobile ID, with my ID card? Can I sign these documents with a qualified electronic signature? And the portals are like, yeah, maybe we can come up with a solution. Let me try to figure it out. And this is where they start to think of advanced and qualified in their own platforms. For them to have these signatures, for them to be able to accept these signatures, they have three options. Option number one, they can become their own qualified trust service provider. And the EU, for all its bad things, has published a list of all the qualified trust service providers who are legally allowed to provide these types of signatures. So if DocuSign wants to become a qualified trust service provider, they need to start making sure that the identity of their users is tied to the signatures that they're doing. What does that mean? That means that every time you'd go and sign a document in DocuSign, they would probably use something like Verif or on video, and they would start taking your passport, scanning your passport or ID card, taking a picture of your face or some sort of video. They would do some matching. They might have a live agent on the other side, but they would tie your identity to the document you're about to sign. As you can imagine, this is lengthy and very, very costly for each signature. So this is one route that they have. And DocuSign actually tried doing this, and each signature that you would do would cost you something like 10 euros. Now, for most people, 10 euros for a signature is a little bit too much, unless you're doing a multi-million euro deal. Second option, they don't have to become their own qualified trust service provider. They can plug in to solutions that are already out there throughout all of Europe. So they can start talking to the Estonian government, they can start talking to the Latvian government, the Finnish government, all of the different governments in Europe and say, can we now start using, adopting your ID card in our platform so that people can start signing documents with the ID card? So that's the second option. They knock on the door of every single QTSP out there and they start adopting this into them. Or they have the third option, and the third option is to talk to us. So what we do is we aggregate all these methods that already exist out there, we put them in a simple API, and with this API, they can now accept signatures from all over Europe at the highest possible level. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. We aggregate all the methods that are out there, and we place them in a simple API, so at the end of it, the user can sign using their preferred method, the method that they already have in their hands, and most of the times there's no need for a selfie, there's no need for a passport scanning or an ID card scanning, so the cost of each signature becomes significantly lower compared to the other process. So what is for us the importance of testing? So testing is very, very important. As I was saying yesterday, we don't have a QA person, we don't have a tester. We're a small startup that is just coming out, but testing is fundamental for what we do, and for a number of reasons. We are negotiating in trust. For a lot of the portals, the fact that, or for a lot of the documents, for the fact that they need a qualified signature means that they need to trust the signature that they're putting there. So we are basically transacting trust. If there was no need for QES, you would do multi-million euro deals with a handshake or with an oral agreement. But that's not the case. The reason why they need QES, the reason why they need to identify the person is because of a lack of trust. So trust is super important for what we do. We cannot afford to have a signature suddenly not being valid, a timestamp being wrong, something going wrong in the signature process. All of this is paramount to what we do. So testing, in a nutshell, is super important. How do we combine that with the fact that we're a startup and we need to move super fast to have all the methods covered, to implement new methods at a super fast pace so that we can cover all of Europe quickly and have something like 2 methods per month? That's kind of the pace that we're going at the moment, 2 new methods each month. So how do we combine this testing, you know, this sort of culture of making sure that it doesn't break, with the fact that we need to move super fast, and that being a startup, we have limited resources. So how do we prioritize here? And this is where we go to the challenges. So there's a number of challenges that I want to put to you. Some of them we've figured out, some of them we understand kind of like how the logic of it is going to work and how we're going to solve it. Others, I would love to get your feedback and I would love to get your input on this. So if you meet me at the coffee break, I'd love to pick your brains on that. So challenge number 1, the compatibility of signatures. As you could already understand, we are combining different methods. We have multiple methods in our API, and most of the use cases for what we do have to do with cross-border signing. So if I'm a startup that's raising money from different investors in different countries, I'm going to need a signature from each of them. They're probably located in different geographies. They're going to use different methods. Someone is going to use the Estonian ID card. Another guy in Portugal is going to use their ID card. Some guy in Belgium is going to use a mobile app that they have. How do we make sure that these signatures are compatible? Now, take into account that according to eIDs regulation, an Estonian guy signing a contract with their Estonian ID means that this signature is valid throughout all of Europe. This is what the law says. In reality, it's not always the case. We've seen countless examples of guys signing documents with their Estonian qualified methods, going to Finland, which is not that far, and having the Finnish tax office say, what is this? I don't know what this signature means. I've had people here in Estonia where I signed something with my Portuguese card and it's not in a container like this AZK containers. It's just a signature on a PDF, but using my ID card. And they're again in Estonia asking, what is this? I need an AZK file. So there's still a lot of issues when it comes to compatibility between different countries and different methods. Even though the legal framework is there, on the ground, the reality is much different. So challenge number one is making sure that these are compatible and that you can combine different methods in the same document and not having it break. A bigger challenge than that is making sure that when you add a new signature, it doesn't break the previous ones. So most of the times these signatures happen sequentially, and if they do, there's a big risk that one new signature is going to break the previous one. So we need to make sure that they don't break. And the third challenge is making sure that we can allow for the same document to have qualified, advanced, and simple signatures and still not break. And this is perhaps one of the biggest challenges because not everywhere in Europe people are using qualified signatures. For example, in Sweden, any Swedish people in the house? Yay. Oh, I got quite a few. So in Swedish, you guys are probably used to bank ID. Right? So everyone in Sweden is using bank ID, and bank ID is an identification method which we can use to produce a signature based on that identification method. But it constitutes all the way up to advanced. It doesn't go all the way qualified, at least not yet. That's something we're working on. What that means is that if you're doing business with Sweden, it's unrealistic to expect them to use a different method than the one they're already used to. And that's going to create problems when doing the combination. So I just have a short example here from a study one of our guys did as a research, where he was trying to combine different levels of signature in the same document. So you see here a document with, I think it's 23 different signatures, where we combine qualified, advanced with a qualified certificate, advanced, and a simple signature. So on the top, and this is if you open it in Adobe. So if you open in Adobe, you will be able to see the signature panel and the different types of signatures. On the top, you see all the QES, you see the one which is advanced qualified certificate, and another QES, and you'll see the physical representation there. On the middle there, you see a simple electronic signature that was done, for example, with our platform that is based on an email confirmation. And then you see the kind of the visual stamp or the visual confirmation of the seal with the signer's name. So we identify that based on the email. There's also one that is using a 2FA, so with SMS, so you get an additional layer of identification, in this case, the phone number. And then you see, this was in the case, I think, of Finland's bank ID and bank codes or mobile ID. Then you have another portal that was using simple signatures with email. And as I was saying, the main thing is that a new signature may never invalidate the previous one. So what happened to this huge document with a lot of signatures when we uploaded it to a new portal and we tried to create a new signature? By simply adding 2 new signatures, it invalidated all the previous ones. So you had a document with 20 signatures, 23 signatures. You now give it to someone else to sign this document. They upload it to the portal that they're familiar with. They put their signatures, and the output of this is that all the previous signatures got invalidated. This is a big no-no. In this case, it was also because a lot of the portals are doing what is called audit trails. So an audit trail is something that a lot of portals are using to make sure that they keep some sort of proof that, you know, the person at this timestamp with this email signed the document, and they think that they're adding legal weight to the document. In fact, what they're doing is that they're modifying the original PDF, adding an extra page at the end of the PDF, and because the document has changed, all the previous signatures get invalidated. So that's no good. So you can see here the consequence of it is that you open it in Adobe and you only see 2 signatures. You don't see all the previous signatures, and that's bad. So a couple of lessons if you're a portal. If you're a portal, you need to take into account to get rid of these audit trails, because if you have a qualified signature, it already shows all the proof that you need. You don't need to have an extra page for it. And make sure that you don't break or invalidate previous signatures. Now, this is something that we're actively doing when we are talking to portals, and we're advising them on how to do it. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Zoho CRM, Zoho Sign. So they are a large Indian-based but with a US headquarters company. They're one of our clients, and they've already changed the way that they deal with audit trails to accommodate for these types of signatures. PandaDoc is going to come out soon with our solution. We're going to do the same thing with them. Challenge number 2. As you can imagine, this is a super fragmented market. Each country has their own solution. Each country has their own public solution. Some of them have public-private partnerships, and then there's a lot of private solutions popping up. The reason for this is that, the public solutions are usually tied to identity cards. Right? Everyone in Europe, well, most countries in Europe have an identity card. So if you have one of these with a chip, then the government is in charge of this. Whenever you get to pick up the card, there's an identification process between you and the police officer, or between you and the government official who's giving you the ID card. So they know that this is you, and they'll give you the certificates which you can use. There's a lot of private solutions out there in the form of USB tokens, in the form of mobile apps, and for all of them there has to be a process of identification, most of the times face-to-face, to make sure that we know who you are. The challenge that this is a fragmented market doesn't scare us. I mean, this is why we're here, right? This is why we exist. We're here to make sense of this fragmented market. The problem appears when different actors in this fragmented market have different attitudes towards being integrated. If you're a private app and your number one goal is acquire users, they're super happy to talk to us, because we're going to give them more usages for their identification or signature method. So they'll give us the APIs, they'll give us the documentation, they'll happily give us test users to integrate. If, on the other hand, you're a public institution, the conversation is a little bit different. They have no idea what you're doing. They have very little interest in talking to you. Their motivations are from a public sector, very differently aligned with what we're trying to do. And it takes a little bit of convincing to tell them that we're going to help their users by making sure that they can use their ID cards to sign documents in other places where they haven't previously been able to do. One of the latest conversations we're having is with the government of Ukraine, where we're trying to integrate with their government solution for signing documents, so that Ukrainians, especially now when they're spread all over Europe, can keep using their government identity and their government signature method to sign documents in all over Europe using our platform. So at least there's a few governments out there that are interested in making sure that their citizens can do this. So I think for us, the kind of the challenge here is understanding the mindset of the different providers. This also comes with the next challenge, and these are connected challenges, which is a lack of documentation. I'm sure this is something you guys are familiar with in what you do. A lot of times we have to go through different places to look for the documentation. It isn't there. We need to make sure we talk to the right person. Estonia, in this remark, is kind of a benchmark in terms of how they provide not just the source code, the documentation in the communication, but for others, it might not be the case. Documentation is either outdated, doesn't exist, is not translated, is not immediately available unless you sign a contract or an NDA or something like that. So it's a very cumbersome way to have to deal with documentation. Challenge number 4, the technology on the ID cards itself is also very different. So different physical ID cards have different cryptographic standards. Again, this is not something that we're afraid of. This is why we're here to do, but it's just something that we've learned along the way. There's also different ways to make sure that, usually when you get the Estonian ID card or your national ID card, you also are told to download a piece of software so that you can use this ID card to sign documents. In many countries, this is a different type of software. Currently, I think here in Estonia, RIA has started this new project, Web eID, that is trying to aggregate all of the different ID card reading technology so we can use them in the browser, which is great for what we do. So we're very supportive of that initiative. Different cards have different ways of dealing with the certificates. Some have 1 PIN, some have 2. Some countries don't even allow you to legally read the data that's on the cards, specifically in France. So in France, we were told that we can't legally read the data that's on the card. In fact, not even their government can do that. Only the police and border guard can read the data that's on the card, which is, I guess, GDPR to the next level, but you know, that's very French of them. And some countries don't even have an ID card. Like, for example, the UK. The UK doesn't have a national identification scheme where everyone has an ID card. So we have to come up with alternatives to read it. That's why we are not just focusing on the ID cards. That's why we're also going after things like Bank ID in Sweden and other identification schemes in different parts of the world. That brings us also to the next challenge, which is access rights. Some countries are limiting who can have developer access to their APIs, or who is even allowed to integrate it. For a lot of these countries, you need to have a physical presence in the country, whether by being a citizen or having a company established there. Now, as you can imagine, for a small startup, that's beyond the scope of what we can do. So we have to navigate through a lot of different hoops to get there. So we've seen it in the case of Portugal, Italy, Norway, Sweden, France, that in order to get access to some of the documentation, or in order to get access to the method and be able to implement it, we need to have at least a bank account or a company, or have someone from the country to be there. So I guess kind of a lesson learned here is to make sure you have a lot of friends spread throughout Europe, and then you just use what they can get access to so that we can implement it. Next challenge that we have is a tricky one, because it has to do with test credentials and production credentials. Now, I think here you might relate to this a little bit, because when you're deploying a new method and you're testing it out, most of the times you would assume that there is a set of test credentials that you can use in your sandbox, and you can use this to test if the integration is going well, and you wouldn't test it with production credentials. Sadly, that's not the case everywhere. And we've seen a lot of cases where we don't have, the governments don't have test cards. If they have test cards, they don't give it out to people in Estonia. So we need to test with the live credentials, live cards. We need to actually, again, have friends in different countries who are willing to cooperate with us and tell us what their PIN to is, so that we can read what data is coming out of the card. But it becomes a challenge when you try to scale fast. And I think also the important thing to notice here is that if you do not have this type of testing environment, then it's very tricky to come up with situations that might break it. Because a lot of times when you have a good documentation, it also talks about the what can go wrong. What happens if the authentication fails? What happens if the card reading fails? And if you don't have that, you're going to have to learn as you do it. And it's very hard to automate some of the testing. And when we talk about automation, then this is where I think one of the biggest challenges we have comes. Because since we have so many different methods, testing all of the different possible signing flows, and what happens when they are on the website and the card doesn't work, or the USB thing doesn't work, or the browser hasn't been restarted, or the plugin isn't there, or if they need to do something with their mobile app, or there's a 2FA. So there's a myriad of different testing scenarios that become very, very difficult to test for, and become very difficult to automate for all of these different scenarios, all the different integrations that we have. Take into account that, this is our primary job, making sure that it works smoothly and that the end user never has to face the challenges that we're talking about here, right? So these are challenges for us. But if you go to the client side, so our clients, if you think of the document signing portals, specifically in the case of Zoho Sign, they have their developers in India, right? So they need to integrate our API, easy peasy. The name is eID easy, right? So we make it easy for them with a simple API. They have the methods. Our integration is a no-brainer. But how do they make sure that it works? How can they test, being in India, how can they test that signing with the Estonian ID card is going to work? Or signing with Smart ID is going to work? Or with the Swedish Bank ID is going to work? They don't have those methods. So how can they get test credentials themselves if we cannot get test credentials? And that becomes a bigger challenge, because basically for those clients, it's nearly impossible to get the methods, take into account that our clients are not the end users. Our clients are the portals. The end users have the methods, right? That's why they're using it, but the portals don't. So how do we make sure that the clients, our clients, can test this safely, either in a sandbox or in a, getting test credentials? And the reality is that so far, they've had to trust us. They basically hope and pray that everything goes well and that nothing is broken and everything works. Usually, I'm obviously exaggerating here. Usually what we do is that because some of the methods do have test credentials, we give those methods for them to implement first, and they test with those test credentials, and if those work, they assume that everything else is working, that the integration went smoothly. So this is a smaller leap of faith, but there's a big chunk of faith that is going throughout here. So, I mean, the challenge that I put out here, some of them have to do with testing, others have to do with the integration of the different methods, and how can we make sure that it's not even a question of speed or the pace, it's just a matter of getting access to some of the things that are not out there. So how do you automate for those scenarios, and how do you create testing flows that allow you to make sure that this is running smoothly all the time? And if you think that this is a big challenge for us, imagine if you're one of those portals, or imagine if you're a fintech, or I was talking to Kazoo yesterday. I don't know if they're here or they still went out and partied late. Yeah, one of them is here. So, imagine if you're a rental company or a car sales company that is trying to do business throughout Europe, and you need to sign a contract with people from Italy, Germany, France, the UK, Sweden, you name it. Our solution might be a good tool for them. And how do they make sure that it works as well, and that all of this is working smoothly? How do we ensure that they're doing it? For us, it's difficult. For them, it would be very, very tricky to go through all of these hoops. So at the end of the day, I mean, obviously, using eID Easy saves them time. It's one less headache that they need to worry about, and they can come to us. They can come to us for their electronic signing solutions, because they can start implementing it from day one. So the go-to market is way, way faster if they come with us, provided that things are working. However, there's one more thing that I want to talk to you about today, and that has come from my years of working with different startups in different settings, and that has to do with team dynamics. I think there was a lot of talk yesterday about testing being part of, testers being part of the team, that we see this more and more as we go with cross-functional teams, and having testing embedded in the team and not just as a separate function. And I think if we talk about agile, talk about cross-functional teams, then team dynamics become even more crucial. And there was a study, I think it was a few years ago, that said 75% of all cross-functional teams are dysfunctional. In many cases, they run over budget, run over the time of delivery, take longer to get up to speed with different projects. And I started wondering, why is that? I mean, I'm a big advocate for cross-functional teams. If you look at most of the startups and most of the hackathons that I help to organize, we're talking always of cross-functional teams, right? We're always talking about making sure you have designers, developers, product owners in the team working together collaboratively to make sure that the result is delivered for the client in the best possible way. So what can we learn from hackathon teams? What can we learn from these teams that are formed on the spot for a short period of time to tackle on a specific challenge? And I have a statistic here up on the screen. It's a made-up statistic, but anyway, it makes the point. 85% of winning teams at hackathons are also the ones that have the most fun during the weekends. We don't actually go around asking people if they had fun or not, but this is just my perception. Most of you are from Estonia. Just show of hands if you've ever been to a hackathon. All right, quite a few. So I'm assuming most of you are familiar with the concept of a hackathon. It usually takes place over a short period of time, like a weekend. You get people in, there's an idea, there's a challenge, there's some sort of concept that they want to work with, and we push them through those 48 hours to move from the idea phase into a prototype phase where they actually need to build something that they can later validate with their customers. So in a very short amount of time, they make a tremendous amount of progress. I don't know how much testing goes into that, but for sure they have something they can show. So the first lesson to take from them is this, specifically the time constraint, right? It's called 48 for a reason, right? You give them a clear deadline. There's a specific boundary of time that they have to deliver something by the end of it, and whatever happens after is no longer relevant. So this time constraint factor is very, very important. This is also why design sprints can be so effective, because you give people a specific time, a week, to get something done, and you get everyone around the table to focus on that. So it's not so much the the typical sprint planning that we have, but it's a very dedicated time focus. Second lesson is, and I think this is perhaps one of the most important ones, total ownership. There's a very, very vague idea of what the outcome is going to be, but there is no God. No one's going to come to rescue you. You and your team are out there on the trenches, on the front lines, making sure that progress is made, and it's completely up to you what happens that weekend. There is some support and help, but if you're not the one putting in the effort, there's nothing good coming out at the end. So there's complete ownership of the result. There's no layers of complicated management. There's no layers of complicated, messy strategic alignments. You own the outcome. And I think this is very important also as a lesson for what we do in our daily lives. Lesson number 3, this is a tough one. This is a tough one because when you meet people at a weekend for that sort of initial period of time, you usually don't have a lot of egos. And what I mean with this is that there hasn't been enough time for you to get to know everyone well enough for this sort of dynamics to establish. So there's no clearly defined roles. Everyone is doing the best they can to get the job done. I might not be a designer, but I'm sure as hell gonna help however way I can to make sure that it's user-friendly. I might not be a developer, but I'm sure as hell gonna get coffee to that developer. I'm not gonna touch the code. And so there's no baggage, there's no office politics, there's no, no need to look good in front of your boss or in front of someone else. There's no history of having to compete for the same position. You're all focused and aligned in delivering the same result. This might not always be the case in our office environment, but I think it's an important lesson. So I have here a question, which is, can you run a team like you do a hackathon team in the long run? Is it feasible? You see it at the end of the 48 hours, people are exhausted, and they're exhausted obviously for a reason. So is it sustainable to run a hackathon team, to run a team as you do during a hackathon in the long run? And I want to bring here a very important chart which has guided me throughout my professional life whenever I start new teams or whenever I start new companies or I move into new environments. And that is the team team performance chart. Are you guys familiar with this? Show of hands. Yeah, some of you. All right. So this is a very basic chart that talks about how effective the team is over a period of time from all of the different phases. And this is something that has to do with when you put a team together. In the first phase, you're just in what's called the forming. So you form a team, you have a common goal, you are just together. It's maybe too much to call it a team. You're basically a group of people with a common goal, right? You're trying to set something together, and perhaps the team wasn't even self-formed. Perhaps people assigned them to stay together. So the forming phase is when everyone is kind of super polite to everyone. There's a lot of nodding, a lot of agreements, a lot of avoiding of conflicts, a lot of trying to understand, how everyone operates, trying to make sure that, we deliver something. So the effectiveness is kind of average. You get the job done. You might not miss deadlines. You might get there in time. But the effectiveness is not stellar. You're very careful not to hurt people's feelings, right? And then you get into the first conflicts. Someone missed their first deadline. You know, the developer, I don't know, drank too much coffee, perhaps, whatever happened. Someone has a different opinion about how the user experience should look like. There's the first clashes, and here you enter the storming phase. Now, the storming phase is perhaps the most important phase of any team dynamic, and let me be very clear about this. It is unavoidable. You cannot skip the storming phase. Without the storming phase, you do not get to a high-performance team. And this is a problem and a challenge for a lot of the Estonians in the audience. And I've worked with a lot of Estonians, so I have some first-hand knowledge. Because Estonians are very good at avoiding conflict. They really do their best not to get into a conflict scenario. So they avoid the storming, and what usually happens is that when they are in the storming phase, perhaps without even acknowledging that they are in the storming phase, their first reaction is, fuck it, I'm out of here. Like, this is not the place for me, you know? Toxic environment, I'm out of here, right? And I mean, there's some parallels here with relationships, but I don't want to get into that. We can talk about it later. For professional relationship advice. But yes, so this happens, as I said, you know, in a work setting when there's the first arguments and the first disputes and the first kind of bouncing of heads and not agreeing eye to eye on where the company should go or how the product should look like or the deliverables or the mission of the company, whatever it might be, but there's a storming phase. And because a lot of Estonians are not good at dealing with this, you see a lot of teams that stick around in the forming and then they dissolve in the storming, or they move out and, you know, other people come in, so the performance is kind of always on the medium ground. You need to have the storming. And why is the storming so important? It's important because without it, you cannot get to the next stage. The next stage is the norming. And the norming, it is the phase when the unwritten rules of the group start to become apparent. You know, the person who has the title of manager might not be the person who the team turns to when they have an issue. You know, unwritten leadership appears. Roles that were clearly marked on the paper might take on a different meaning after the norming phase. If a guy is always late with their deadlines, I either need to learn to live with it or find a way to work around it. But I understand how he works. I understand the unwritten rules that are not on a contract, on a work contract. I understand that, you know, if someone is the guy who's going to be, you know, more active in the morning or more active in the afternoon, I know how to work with them better. I know how to work with people because I understand where those clashes came from. Now, I think one of the issues why people find it so hard to go through the storming is that there's not a good way to facilitate a team while they're in the storming. So the first lesson here is recognizing when the team is in the storming. And I've seen cases where people are like, oh yeah, we've had our first clashes. So the team formed a month ago, we had our first clashes, now we're in the norming. That's impossible. Storming can take months to go through. So it's unreasonable to expect that you're going to have storming in a couple of weeks and then be done. It can take quite long to get the team through the storming phase. But it's important to have a leader, and it doesn't have to be the CEO, it doesn't have to be the team lead, but it's important to have someone to facilitate that storming and facilitate those discussions as you navigate those waters. So to have someone to understand that the team is in the storming, making sure people are aware that we're in the storming and say, guys, it's going to be okay. We're going to come out of this stronger, all right? We're bouncing our heads here, we're clashing, but it's fine. It's a normal phase in the growth of our team. After the norming, so after the team has gone through the process of the unwritten rules, you can finally go to performing. And performing is nirvana. Performing is, you know, is the Beatles. Performing is when you have a team that knows so well the strengths and weaknesses of each other that they have absolute trust in how the product is going to look like. There's no need for reminders. There's no need for nagging. I got your back. I'm Cristiano Ronaldo playing in Real Madrid, knowing where the ball is going to be. I'm Lionel Messi playing in Barcelona, knowing that the ball is going to come to me at the right time. I'm at the performing stage. I'm so good that I don't need any cues from my team to know what's going to happen next. We're in a phase of, synchronized wavelength, and you read each other's minds so well. Let me also be very clear about this. Very, very few teams make it there. I think in my professional life, I've been there twice. And when you know you're there, ride that wave, because it's very, very rare. All of us are super smart individuals in this room. And we could be doing whatever the hell we wanted with our lives. Getting a good team to work together, for me, that's way more important than what you're doing. So why is this trust so important? Why is trust so important? Trust is so important because in the startup world and the world of business that we do, trust equals speed. If you have trust with your team, if you're not afraid to expose your weaknesses, if you're not afraid to say that, guys, I'm not going to meet this deadline. In the beginning, in the forming phase, no one's going to admit that they're not going to meet the deadline, right? But at the performing stage, there's no problem whatsoever to say, guys, I'm not going to make the deadline. And someone's going to pick up the slack, and they understand why you're not going to pick up the deadline. So the trust is fundamental to get there. Another reason why trust is, or why this speed and trust is so important is that I'm sure most of you are familiar with this loop, the lean loop, build, measure, learn. It's been hammered down to us by all the agile coaches out there. But I think the most important part of this is at the center. And for me, that's the speed. That's the speed of learning. How quickly is the team learning determines how quickly or how good they're going to be or how successful the team is going to be. So you can see how trust has a direct correlation with speed and how fast the team is moving. So another lesson that can be learned from startups or from these hackathon teams is using outside threats as a way to bind the team together. Now, why is this important? It's important also during the storming phase. In the storming phase, usually I have a clash with another person within the team. It's me versus you. But if there's a good facilitator of the storming, we understand that there's a common goal here and there's a common enemy out there. We are together trying to find the best solution to solve the problem for the client. Yesterday when I was up here and there was this, on the panel we were talking about how some of the developers, some junior developers are still saying that if something doesn't work for the client, their initial response is, it works on my machine. Well, this is where some of the clashes might appear, but you need to embed in them the idea that it's not me versus the developer, but it's the two of us trying to help the client together. So this outside threat, let's get to the bottom of this, is super important. And there's a bit of a tribal element to this, that you can bind people together if there's a common threat outside of the organization. So that can be useful, at least in the short run. And the last lesson that I have here is that when people feel safe, when there's this level of trust in the team, when they're at this performing stage, that allows the team to take chances. And when a team takes chances, they innovate. They come up with new solutions for existing problems. So it's very important to have that safety aspect and to make sure that you can take those risks. I give the example of one of the boot camps that I was doing at Telia when they had this VUNC program. During those few days, one of the teams changed the homepage of Telia.te, and I guarantee you they broke 100 different rules inside the company on how things are released and how you can change the front page. But they felt protected, they felt safe. And if you do that in a corporate environment, in a massive corporate environment, then that's a massive win for the organization because it allows them to take risks and take chances and innovate at a pace that they wouldn't before. So I think as a conclusion to all of this, what I want to leave you with, especially if you're working currently for startups, if you're working for teams that need to innovate fast and build the product, is at the end of the day, don't focus on products, build teams. Teams are fundamental, like I said before. All of us are super smart individuals. You could be working on whatever you wanted to. The people you work with, the fun you have at work, 85% of winning teams are the ones that have fun. Remember that fake stat. Are the ones that have fun. So remember that when you're building your team, because I think that's the core of what we do. At the end of the day, it's kind of all bullshit anyway, so you might as well do that bullshit with teams that you have fun with. And that's it. Thank you very much. I was told to expect questions, which is highly unlikely in an Estonian audience, but I'm happy to be proven wrong.
Well, for that we exactly have the right tool, which is called question assurance. It works very well after a long party like yesterday. Looking at the party yesterday, I'm pretty sure actually, the teams that go through phases, you guys were performing yesterday, definitely. So, questions?
There's a question.
There you go.
Hello, and thank you for very structured information that was easy to perceive. And my question relates to the first part of it. At what stage are you currently now with your eID Easy project? Have you started, tested it, and when can we expect this solution in the market? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that. So the product is out there. The product is live. You can start using the API. We have integrated more than 15 different methods. So more than 15 different methods in different countries in Europe are live on our platform. We have coverage for all of Europe at the moment. So the product is live. You can go to eIDs.com, check out the documentation, and you can start using it.
So I think the question is on everyone's mind. How much have you tested it?
How much have I tested it? Personally, I've tested it from an end user point of view with some of the methods that I have. The team, as I mentioned, is on a constant testing mode, so they have embedded testing into their workflows. So it works.
Makes you cry, doesn't it? In a good way. Yeah? Here you go.
I'm sorry, it may be a bit technical, but from a helicopter point of view, do you remember any names of the tools that you use for assuring quality in your product? I've seen you use Postman for API docs, which is great.
Yeah.
I love that, but maybe some other tools?
I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. I'm not a tech guy, but let's get in touch. I can refer to you to our tech guys. But yeah, we have, the documentation and then the Postman, and yeah.
There's one over this other side.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. Once you've conquered Europe, is there any plans to expand to the other parts of the world?
All right, very good question. So yes, in fact, we started in Europe just because the regulations in Europe are more clear and straightforward, and there's a legal framework for us to operate with these different levels, and there's different providers. But a lot of other countries outside of Europe are looking at what the EU is doing and copying the same behavior. We are currently getting requests from South Africa, Brazil, Singapore. So there are methods out there in other parts of the world that have the same type of structure. So we will be integrating other countries outside of Europe.
So instead of a testing question, I'll ask you a startup question, okay? So how long is the runway?
How long is the runway? So runways are always short. That's why we're in fundraising mode at the moment. We expect to close around by the end of this year. So runway is going to last us somewhere until the end of this year.
How much?
We're raising 1 million, and the valuation is up for discussion. But we're raising 1 million by the end of this year.
So if you have a 1 million, you know where to put it.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, by the sound of it, people are longing for coffee. And Joao, it was a very interesting speech. Thank you for coming. A big round of applause.
Thank you.